So, why would it become a big deal? Why did this all of a sudden become a big deal? Well, as it turns out, it became a big deal because of the Turks. If you remember, last time we left the Turks up there, and you see that little purple, area up there? That's what's left. Constantinople is right on the European side of that empire. Look at the Ottomans are totally surrounded. And what makes it worse, the Byzantines are fighting the Northmen. The Northmen, remember I told you the unsung history, they've conquered England, most of France. They're coming through Italy, Naples, and they're coming up through the south. So while they're fighting the Northmen, the Ottomans basically take over what is today Turkey and on the European side as well. So a young emperor named Mehmed II, he becomes 19 years old. He becomes a sultan around 1450 or so, 1452. And he says, it's time for us to conquer Constantinople and get all that revenue that they've got. So the Byzantine ambassadors to his court are beheaded. He just kills them all. This kind of sends a message to the emperor, Constantine XI, that I think this guy means business. He's like 19. Why is he so brutal? Well, in Islamic cultures at that time, they had lots of kids. And the boys all fought to be the sultan's son, the sultan's. So he was the third son. So you can imagine how brutal he must have been. He killed his older two brothers and all the other brothers. That's what you did to become the sultan after if you were one of the sultan's sons. He had already done that by the time he was 19. So this kid is not a kid anymore. He is a warrior, and he wants to take over Constantinople, and he sends a message to Constantine XI that cannot be ignored. So what happens? Well, they circle the wagons. Now, this is something that I didn't know. You probably don't know this either. The Byzantines were Romans. They were not Greeks. They had Greek culture, but they were Romans. They handed out a warrior culture of the Roman army from generation to generation, like our Marines today, generation to generation, down. They're fighters, right? So they had Greek culture, but the Byzantines themselves were Roman fighters. And it ended up about 8,000 Byzantine fighters, Roman fighters on the walls, against about 80 to 150,000, we're not sure, of the attacking enemy. So it makes our Alamo look like a picnic, right, by comparison. It was huge. No one's ever made a movie on this. I don't know why. It would be maybe because we lost. But it'd be a great movie, the attack on Constantinople. Right? You get over one set of walls and you get another set of walls meeting you. There's three sets of these walls. So that's the gate that he broke through eventually. He broke through that gate. And there's the street sign which has the name of the gate on it today. These are the walls that are still up. These are my photographs from 2005, I believe, is when I was there. If you ever have a chance to go, it's a fantastic place to visit. Constantinople, or Istanbul today, is just an amazing, amazing city. Don't believe the stuff that it's not safe. If you walk the streets of Chicago or Los Angeles, you can walk the streets of Istanbul, no problem at all. So this is what the young guy was up against, Mehmed II, these walls. Well, why did he even have a chance? Well, he had a huge army. And he also had an invention from a Hungarian Catholic. A Hungarian Catholic named Orhan invented this cannon. Now, you could stand in that opening. He had two of these, and he was selling them to the highest bidder. Well, the highest bidder couldn't be Byzantium anymore because they're out of money. Remember, they were sacked by the Fourth Crusade. The Fourth Crusade basically raped Constantinople, took all the stuff, sent it to Venice. You can go to Venice today and see all the stuff that they stole from Constantinople. So Byzantines are wrecked. But the plague, there was a huge plague in 1350, killed more than half the people. So Byzantine is broke. The Sultan decides to hire this guy, and they have two teams of 15 to 20 oxen each, and they're pulling these guns up to the city walls. And they start firing them on Easter Sunday, right after Easter Sunday, on 1453, they open fire on these guns. Now they killed a bunch of their own people, blew out their eardrums, blew themselves up until they figured out how to work this gun. But once they figured out how to work this gun, they did considerable damage to the walls. Now for the next 4 to 6 weeks, they plummeted the walls during the daytime, and then the Byzantines would come out at night, and they'd rebuild the walls at night. So this went on for about 6 weeks until mid-May, towards the end of May. But then finally, it looks like they had a major breakthrough. These guns were firing really well at the end of May, and they broke through that area near that gate that I showed you before. They broke through. So this became a problem. Now in Constantinople, they had, all the nuns, all the priests, everyone was at the walls supplying the Byzantines. It was life or death. But Mehmed II, his army that he was attacking with was Christian mercenaries. And the Christian mercenaries were getting tired of 6, 7 weeks. They said, hey, this is enough of this. They wanted to go home. So Mehmed had a problem. What would he do? Well, here's how he solved it. He said, we're going to have equal spoils for everyone. I'm not going to have less spoils for the Christian mercenaries and more for my Islamic army, He also had something called the Janissaries. Do you know what Janissaries are? Janissaries were the Praetorian Guard. They were the secret service of the Sultan. They would go to Christian lands and they would take the young athletic men, the most athletic men when they were 5, 6 years old, and they'd take them from their homes and they'd put them into the harem, and they'd be raised Islamic, and they became his personal guard, his personal army. Very tough warriors, kind of like the Knights Templar on the western side. So he had these knights, he had these Janissaries, he had his own army, he had the Christian mercenaries, and he decided on May 30th to make an all-out assault. Now, you have to visualize this. The Turks attacked at night, 1:30. They had a military band. That's where our military bands come from. They come from the Turks. The flags and the bands are all Turks. They played bands, they played drums, they were beating. You see, they got these things all fired up. In the middle of the night, they'd shoot flares up, and then they would attack these walls. On the Byzantine side, they were ringing all the church bells. They're ringing all the church bells. So you can imagine what this was like. Church bells are all going like crazy. These guys are attacking on one side. They had this all-out attack, and somehow the Byzantines held. They held, and they fell. They drew them back. Well, they had a great mass, eastern right, western right. They had a great mass. They had a procession through the streets where they carried a big statue of Mary, and the statue fell down. The statue fell. They couldn't get it back up on the site. It was a bad omen, real bad omen. Right after they managed to get the statue back up, a hailstorm came. Unknown that time of year. A hailstorm came. And after the hailstorm, fog. So it went back with real bad omens. If you know the story of Hitler's invasion of Poland, same thing happened the night he decided to invade Poland. Very bad skies were all over. It's almost like the world knows bad things are going to happen. So the Byzantines, the old and the young, the really old go into the Hagia Sophia, lock themselves in, and everyone else goes to the walls for this final attack. Well, the final attack, the Christian mercenaries come in. They don't get through. So they're pinned in by the Islamic army. The Islamic army says, you can't retreat. We're going to kill you. So they're pinned against the walls. Then he attacks with the Islamic army. The Islamic army, the Turks, almost scale the walls. But they're held. Amazingly, they're held. They break through at a couple points, and they're held. And we think there was some treachery at that gate that I showed you. That the gate I showed you was left open somehow. And then, against the advice of all his advisors, this young 19, 20-year-old Sultan Mehmed II decides to attack with his Janissaries, his last force. So he attacks with the Janissaries, goes through, they break through, and there's this big fight at the gate that I showed you. Well, the Emperor, Constantine XI, he gets on his horse, puts on his armor, soldier's armor, not Emperor's armor, and he leads an attack of the final Romans through the streets, and there's this big battle at the walls, and the Emperor's killed. We don't know exactly what happened to him, but he was killed fighting at the end. Well, the Islamic warriors went in, and they got even with the Jerusalem slaughter of the Crusaders. They killed everybody in Hagia Sophia. They said the blood was running down there wasn't steps there. It was like a stairway, and when you walk up the stairway, it's like a ramp. So it's like it's for wheelchair ramp now today, but that was just blood was just flowing down there, and he rode his horse into battle. Now here's an artist's rendition of the final fight when Mehmed II, and he rode that horse into Hagia Sophia, onto the altar, and made it into a mosque, which it is today. And now it's a museum today, but I think they want to make it back into a mosque. There's also some drawing. This is the Constantine the 11th and the final battle as they broke through. Loss of Constantinople finally got the West's attention, where people in the West stopped fighting with each other, and they started collecting their own armies. So back in Spain, once Constantinople fell, the Castilians in the center of Spain there, these Castilians became the world's best guerrilla fighters. And those are the same Castilians that conquered the Incas and the Mayans. And now when we speak Spanish in America, that's where they come from, these guys. They would carry grammar books in their packs. They had to have the pure Castilian language because they didn't want to talk with the Catalans over here, the Portuguese over here. It had to be Castilian. So that's the Spanish heritage in America and the United States today comes from these Castilians who drove out the Al-Andalus Muslims, drove them out and started to unify Spain into a huge power, which it became in the next century. Europe did the same thing. So all over Europe, these powers in the whole, what's called the Holy Roman Empire, the Papal States, even the Normans here in southern Italy, in Bohemia, they all started to develop strong armies in anticipation of the Turkmen. Unfortunately, instead of fighting the Turkmen with these armies, Martin Luther came along in 1517, and they ended up fighting each other, right? We call the Western Religious Wars. Killed about 15 million people. How would that be today? That would be about 150 million people today. That would be more people lost than both world wars on both sides combined died in these religious wars instead of helping the Constantinople people. So you see what a disaster it was? The whole thing, the whole Western society was in crisis. Back in the universities, 1520, 1530, following Luther and following the King of England, Henry, him leaving the Catholic Church, they were still teaching the stuff that Nicholas de Cusa talked about. But now it was heresy. Now it wasn't just fun. So a young Dominican friar named Giordano Bruno took Nicholas de Cusa's papers that were well known, and he just started preaching about Earth, and they burned him at the stake. 1600. They burned him at the stake. So now it was. Now all of Europe had become chaos. Now, was that caused by zero? No. But what I'm telling you, the really interesting thing to me is that everything I told you before is pre-Galileo. Galileo is coming. You see what I mean? So we think of automatically go to Galileo and there's this argument with the church. No, it was all set up. The whole Western culture was already in chaos. People were looking for new philosophies, new ideas, new mathematics. What was going to replace our old mathematics? And what they replaced it with was this book. And this book was, we'll pick this up next week. Who do you think wrote that book? The first book of ethics in the West. It's ethics and morality based solely on reason, totally on reason. His name is Spinoza. Spinoza was the first, and we'll pick him up